Montana Territory, October 1879, the wind cut sharp over the Bitterroot Range, carrying the scent of pine, snow, and blood. Garin Daniels spotted the smoke first. A thin, ragged line rising between the spruce trees, too far off the trail to be a settler's fire. He reined in his bay gelding, narrowed his eyes, and listened. No birds, no wind in the branches, just the quiet that settled before something went wrong. He pulled his rifle from the scabbard. "Stay low," he muttered to the horse, though the animal likely knew better than he did how to keep quiet. The trail narrowed, then vanished altogether. He tied the gelding to a pine and moved on foot, boots silent against the soft earth. His coat flapped once in the breeze, then stilled. He saw the camp through a break in the trees, 3 men, 1 fire, and a woman chained to a wagon wheel. She sat slumped, wrists bound in iron, her hair tangled across her face. Her dress was torn at the hem, dirt and blood smudged along the sleeves. Her mouth was bruised. The man closest to her was laughing, sipping from a bottle, Garin's jaw clenched. He had not come looking to be a hero. He had just been passing through, heading north after driving cattle down to Bozeman. But there were lines a man did not walk past, and this was one of them. He stepped back into the cover of the trees, circled wide, and waited until the drunk wandered toward the fire. The other 2 had their backs to the trees, distracted by a game of cards and a slab of jerky. He moved fast. The first man dropped before he even reached for his gun. Garin's boot hit the second in the side, knocking the breath from his lungs, then the rifle cracked once more. The third turned just in time to see his friends fall. He reached for the woman, yanking her up by the chain, gun to her head. "Drop it," the man shouted. Garin stepped into the firelight. "You let her go. She dies, you die too." Garin's aim never wavered. "You think I care?" The outlaw's hand shook. The woman's eyes met Garin's, green, wide, and clear despite everything. She did not scream, she did not beg, she nodded. Garin fired. The man fell back, the bullet through his shoulder. The woman dropped hard against the wheel. Garin was there in seconds, pulling the chain free, yanking the key from the outlaw's belt. Her wrists were raw. Her lips were cracked, but she stood on her own. "I have a horse," he said. "We need to move." She nodded, staggering a little, but she followed. They rode in silence until the trees swallowed the camp behind them. Garin did not stop until they reached a spot near the river, where the rocks curved into a hollow and the horse could rest. He made a fire. She sat across from him, her hands wrapped in his spare kerchief. "I am Garin Daniels," he said quietly. She looked at him. "Perry Joyner," he nodded. "Where were you headed?" "Nowhere anymore." Her voice was low, steady. "They took me from my uncle's ranch, killed him, said they'd sell me south. Thought they'd get more if I looked frightened. You did not." "I was, just not of them." He looked at her, really looked. She was young, maybe 22, but there was a weight in her eyes that did not belong to her years. He understood that weight. He had carried it once, too. "You did not have to come after me," she said. "I did." She stared across the fire. "Why?" He paused. "Because no one else would." Perry's throat worked, but she said nothing. They rode the next day in silence. She let him help her mount, but kept her distance otherwise. Garin did not press. He led her east, toward the small town of Willow Creek, where he knew the sheriff and could get word to her family if any lived. At night, they camped beneath the stars. She ate little. He kept watch longer than he needed to. On the 3rd night, she finally spoke. "You were a soldier," he nodded. "Fought with the 4th Infantry out of Fort Shaw. Did you lose someone?" He looked at the fire. "My brother and something else, maybe myself." Perry was quiet a moment. "I had a younger sister. Fever took her last spring. I think I stopped being myself that day too." He did not say he was sorry. She did not need that. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag and handed her a small tin of salve. "For your wrists." She took it, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you." That night, she did not sleep so far from him. She curled on the other side of the fire, within reach. By the time they reached Willow Creek, her color had returned. The sheriff confirmed what she feared: her uncle was dead. There was no one left on the ranch. The land would be sold. Garin waited outside the office while she spoke with the sheriff. When she came out, her shoulders were set, her chin high. "I am not going back," she said. He nodded once. "You have somewhere else." She looked at him then, really looked. "No," he said nothing, just held her gaze. "You do not have to stay with me," she added. "I know. But you are," he nodded. "I do not understand why." "Because you are not nothing," he said. "And I am tired of riding past things that matter." She swallowed hard. "You do not even know me." He stepped closer. "I know enough." Her breath caught, but she held still. He touched her hand just once. She did not pull away. They stayed in Willow Creek for 3 days. Garen found work repairing the livery roof. Perry helped a widow run her dry goods store. They shared meals. They spoke more. She laughed once, a real laugh, and he felt it settle in his chest like something permanent. On the 4th night, they sat outside the boarding house watching the stars. "I want to build something," she said. "A place, a life, not run anymore." He looked at her. "I could help." She turned to him. "Would you?" Garen nodded. "If you let me." She smiled, not wide, not made for show, just soft and sure. "I would like that," she said. He reached for her hand. This time she held it, and in the quiet under the stars, something that had felt broken in both of them began to mend. The winter came early that year, catching the cottonwoods still half gold along the Jefferson River. Garen had taken a job mending fences for a cattleman just west of Willow Creek, while Perry spent her days sorting bolts of calico and weighing sugar behind the counter at Mrs. Letham's store. They were not yet living under one roof, but there was a rhythm to their days that made the space between them feel less like distance and more like waiting. One evening, just after the sun dipped behind the crazy mountains and the air turned silver with cold, Perry found Garen behind the livery mending a broken stirrup. He looked up, wiping his hands on a rag, and waited for her to speak. "I heard from a man today," she said. "He knew my uncle. Rode through from Helena. Said he'd seen the ranch a few weeks ago. Said the house is still standing." Garen leaned against the stall door. "That surprise you?" "I thought maybe it'd be gone, burned out or picked clean. I tried not to think about it, but now I can't stop." He watched her carefully but didn't interrupt. "I want to go back," she said. "Just to see. I don't know if I'd stay, but I keep waking up with the smell of the dirt floor in my head. I need to know what's left." Garen nodded once. "I'll ride with you." Perry looked away, then back. "You always agree that fast." "No," he said. "Only when it's something that matters." They left before dawn 3 days later, bundled in wool and oilskin. The journey took them over low ridgelines and through narrow valleys where the frost clung to the grass until midday. Perry didn't speak much, but she didn't ride behind him either. She held her own reins. When they reached the narrow road leading up to the ranch, Garen slowed. What remained of the house stood like a husk against the slope roof, sagged but still holding, one shutter hanging loose. Perry dismounted and walked the last stretch alone. He waited by the fence, giving her the silence she seemed to need. She stepped through the broken gate, into the shadow of the house, and disappeared inside. She was gone a long while. When she returned, her eyes were dry. She held a small wooden box in her hands. "I found it under the floorboards," she said. "My uncle kept it for my mother's letters. I didn't know he still had them." Garen didn't ask what was in them. She didn't offer. They camped by the old creek that night, just below the pasture fence. The air was brittle, the sky clear. Garen built the fire high. Perry sat beside it, her knees drawn up under her coat. "I used to think devotion was something you gave to others," she said, her voice low. "To blood, to land, to what was expected, but none of those things ever gave back." Garen turned the coffee pot, letting the ground settle. "So what does it mean now?" She looked at him. "It means showing up. It means staying when there's nothing in it for you but the knowing." He didn't answer right away. The fire popped once, a sharp crack in the stillness. "I used to think loyalty was the same as duty," he said. "But duty makes you hard. Devotion makes you stay soft." "That's harder." Perry reached for his hand, folding her fingers around his. Her grip was sure. "You don't have to fix me," she said. "I'm not asking for that, I know," he said, "but I'm still here." The next morning they rode back slow. By the time they reached Willow Creek again, There was no need for either of them to say what had changed. Perry's house. She followed Garen to the small cabin he kept near the edge of town, the one with a stove that smoked unless the damper was set just right, and a porch that creaked when you crossed it after dark. She carried the wooden box with her. Set it on the shelf beside the fire. That night he made stew from dried beans and what little salt pork they had left. She washed the tin bowls afterwards, sleeves rolled, hair pulled back. When she caught him watching her, she didn't look away. "Do you think," she asked, "we're building something now?" "I think we already have." She stepped toward him, slow and certain. "Then I want to stay." He didn't ask how long. She leaned into his chest and he let his arms go around her. Nothing rushed, nothing stolen. Just two people choosing not to be alone anymore. Outside, the wind picked up again. But inside the cabin, the fire burned steady. March came in slow, dragging snowmelt and mud across the valley like a tired hand. The cabin sat firm against the thaw, its walls patched with cedar. Chinking Garen had worked in with a drawknife while Perry nailed oilcloth over the windows to keep the draft out. They'd fallen into a quiet routine, not out of habit, but because it had begun to feel like theirs. Garen rose early to check the traps he'd set along the river bend, boots mud-caked by the time he came in for coffee. Perry took to stitching grain sacks into curtains, humming low under her breath, half-tunes Garen never quite recognized but always listened for. One evening, he returned with a river otter slung across his shoulder and a stiffness in his right arm. "You favor in it," Perry said, laying out the skinning knife without prompting. "Caught it on the fence rail last week," he said. "Didn't think much of it." "You always don't think much of something till it swells up like a melon." She fetched a basin, poured hot water from the kettle, and unbuttoned his shirt sleeve. Her fingers were steady, but her eyes narrowed at the bruising just above his elbow. "Should have let it rest." "I did," he said. "One day," she dipped a cloth in the water, "you've got a way of pretending pain don't count if you don't name it." He watched her wring the cloth out. "I was taught not to make room for it." She laid the cloth on his arm. "You were taught wrong." The warmth sank into the ache. He exhaled, a sound low in his chest. "Who taught you to do all this?" he asked. She looked up. "My mother." She kept a ledger and a rifle both behind the kitchen stove. Never knew which she'd reach for first. He smiled, more in his eyes than his mouth. "She used to say a woman ought to know how to stitch a wound and skin a rabbit before she learns to dance. She sounded like the kind of woman you'd ride behind into a storm. I think she was the storm." They sat quietly after that, her hand resting lightly on his wrist while the cloth cooled. The fire popped once, but otherwise the cabin held still. "You ever think about leaving again?" he asked. "No," she said. "I think about staying better." Garen nodded once. "You've got a way of saying things like they weigh more than they ought to." "They don't weigh more," she said. "They just don't fall apart when you carry 'em." That night, she pulled her cot beside his bed, not close enough to touch, but near enough that she didn't need to speak to be heard if she woke in the dark. She hadn't done that before. He didn't ask why. The next morning, she was already outside when he rose. The door stood open, frost along the sill. She was in the small clearing behind the cabin, sleeves rolled, mending the chicken coop with lath she'd scavenged from the old barn. He brought her coffee. "You always fix things before they break?" he asked. She looked up, wind brushing her hair across her cheek. "I fix what I can reach, that's the difference." He held the tin cup out to her. "You're not what I expected. I'm not sure I am either most days. You scare me sometimes," he said, not unkindly. She took the cup. "Because I might leave. Because if you left, I wouldn't know how to go back to before." She stood still, cup warming her hands. "I don't plan on leaving. Not even if I make a mess of things." "You will," she said. "So will I. That's not the part that matters." "What does?" "That we both stay standing in the wreckage long enough to clean it up." He took a breath, slow and deliberate. "You sound like someone who's already forgiven me for things I haven't done yet." "I'm just saying I've already decided you're worth the trouble." He didn't touch her, not yet, but he stepped closer. The space between them had changed, not smaller, just clearer. By the end of that week, they'd cleared a patch of land behind the cabin. Garen dug rows with a spade he'd bartered for down in 3 forks, and Perry laid out seeds she'd tucked away in a flour tin: beans, onions, some early cabbage. She knelt in the dirt, brushing back her sleeve, and said, "We grow things now." Garen looked at her, his hands calloused and stained. "That what we're doing?" She didn't answer him with words, just leaned over and pressed her forehead to his, soft and sure like a promise. And in that small clearing, with nothing but the mountains behind them and the river whispering beyond the trees, Garen Daniels understood what it was to be devoted not just to a person, but to the life they were building, one quiet, stubborn day at a time. By early May, the creek behind the cabin ran faster with meltwater, and the scent of turned earth lingered on Garen's hands even after he washed. The cabbage had taken root, and Perry had coaxed the beans into climbing the rough stakes he'd cut from lodgepole pine. The land was beginning to answer back. One morning, she stepped out with a basket looped over her arm, her dress faded but mended clean, and said, "Mrs. Letham's asked me to come help tally freight when the wagon arrives from Virginia City. She's getting slower at her figures." Garen nodded, pulling his suspenders over his shoulders. "You want me to ride in with you? No need. I'll be back before sundown." She paused, adjusting the brim of her straw hat. "But if you think the stove can behave while I'm out, there's a pie in the pantry that could use watching." He grinned, just enough to make her tilt her head. "That a test? That's trust," she said. "And I'm trying not to keep it all to myself." She left on his gelding, reined steady, and disappeared beyond the cottonwoods. Garen stood there for a while, her absence settling over him like the hush before a storm, not ominous, just noticeable. He split wood, mended a loose hinge on the shed door, and kept an eye on the pie like it was liable to run. By mid-afternoon, he'd come to the porch with a tin cup of water and sat there, watching the wind roll over the grass. The quiet had changed. When he heard hooves, he stood. A boy of no more than 12 came riding bareback down the lane, breathless and red-faced. "You're Garen Daniels?" the boy asked, not dismounting. "I am. Your woman's at the store." Some fella came in asking questions. Mrs. Letham said he didn't seem right. Garen's jaw tensed. "What kind of questions?" About Perry, where she came from, if she had family. Asked what name she used when she first arrived. Garen tossed the cup aside. "You tell Mrs. Letham I'm on my way." The boy nodded and turned his pony. Garen saddled his horse in under 2 minutes, rifle slung behind the cantle. The ride into town took less than half an hour, his mind already sorting through possibilities. Not many people knew what had happened to her, and fewer still had reason to come looking. When he reached the store, the wagon from Virginia City still sat out front, half unloaded. Inside, Perry stood stiff behind the counter, one hand resting near the ledger book. Across from her, a man with a narrow face and a gambler's coat leaned on the counter like he owned the place. "You got business here?" Garen asked, stepping in. The man turned, eyes measuring. "Didn't mean to cause alarm. I'm just looking for a girl by the name of Perry Joyner. Heard she might be in these parts." "She's not lost," Garen said. The man raised an eyebrow. "You law?" "No." "But I'm enough." Perry stepped out from behind the counter. "You tell me who sent you or you leave." The man studied her. "Didn't mean offense. It's just that someone's been putting coin behind questions down in Gallatin, over in Red Bluff. I didn't ask why." "I just follow leads." "Then follow them somewhere else," Garen said. The man tipped his hat and left without another word. Perry let out a breath like she'd been holding it too long. "So it's not over?" "No," Garen said, "but it's not yours to carry alone now." She looked at him, eyes steady. "Whoever paid him, they're not finished," he nodded. "Then we make sure we are." They rode back in silence. At the cabin, the pie was still warm. Perry set it on the table, but neither reached for it. She turned from the stove and leaned against the counter. "When they took me, I heard one say something about a debt. I didn't understand it then. But if someone's still looking, maybe it wasn't just about ransom." Garen stood beside the table, hands flat on the wood. "You think someone paid them to take you?" "I don't know." My uncle had a land note, but he never spoke of trouble. If he owed someone and couldn't pay, maybe they thought because I was supposed to be scared. And it worked for a time. Garen crossed to her, slow and certain, and laid a hand on her waist. You're not alone in it now, that's the difference. She leaned into him, forehead against his collar. I keep thinking it'll feel finished. But every time I breathe easy, something comes knocking. Then we answer the door together. Outside, the wind had stilled. The creek ran quieter in the dusk. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. You still sure you want this? All of it? I'm not here for the easy parts. She nodded, that quiet strength blooming behind her eyes. Then we stay ready. He kissed her hair just once, and she held to him like a woman who'd learned the weight of devotion not in words, but in the way a man chose to stand beside her even when the past came calling. The man came back. Not to the store, not into town. He came quiet, walking the edge of the tree line behind the cabin 3 days after the visit to Willow Creek. Garen saw him before the man saw Garen, just a flicker of movement near the aspens, coat too fine for a trapper, boots too polished for a ranch hand. Garen waited until the figure stepped clear of the brush, then raised his voice, calm but clear. You're too close to my land. The man stopped. Didn't come to cause trouble. You've already done that. I only got questions. You'll leave with none. The man glanced toward the house. She inside. Garen's grip on the rifle didn't shift. You should walk away. The man stared a moment longer, then turned and walked back the way he'd come. Garen didn't lower the rifle until the last trace of movement disappeared between the trees. That night, he told Perry everything. She stood by the hearth, her arms folded, expression unreadable. Did he say my name? No, Garen said, but he looked like a man who'd gotten paid to know it. She looked down at the floorboards, then back up. We can't keep waiting for him to return. He held her gaze. What do you want to do? I want to find out who sent him. End it at the root. They rode south the next morning. Perry wore Garen's second coat, too big through the shoulders but warm. She didn't speak much, but her jaw stayed tight. They stopped at a way station east of Red Bluff where riders passed through from the mining towns. Garen asked the stableman if a man with a gambler's coat had passed through recently. The stableman squinted. He was here, stayed 2 nights, asked after landowners north of Willow Creek. Paid in silver, not coin. Did he name anyone? Garen asked. Only said he was working on behalf of a claim holder in Helena. That was all they needed. By dusk the next day they reached Helena's edge. Buildings rose sharper here, the streets busy with wagons and the stink of coal smoke. Perry hadn't been in a town this size in years. They found the land office just off Fuller Avenue. Garen stayed outside with the horses while she stepped in, shoulders square. The clerk was an older woman, spectacles riding low on her nose. Perry laid the deed from her uncle's ranch on the desk. I need to know if anyone filed a claim against this land in the last year. The woman flipped through a ledger. There's a lien filed under a man named Bartlett, filed 6 months before his death. Perry's stomach pulled tight. Is there a forwarding address? The clerk hesitated. Only says R.K. Fenton, executor. Outside, she told Garen, Fenton was my uncle's former business partner. He backed out years ago when the cattle thinned. I thought he was gone. Garen frowned. He must have thought he could claim the land after your uncle passed. Send someone to make sure you didn't return. They rode to the edge of town where the address pointed a lawyer's office above a saloon. Fenton was inside, lean and pale, with a trimmed beard and a silver pocket watch he kept checking. Perry stepped through the door like she wasn't afraid of anything. Did you send a man after me? She asked. Fenton looked up, startled. Miss Joyner, answer me. He straightened behind the desk. I was within my rights to check on the status of the land. Your uncle owed me a debt. You assumed I was gone or dead. Fenton didn't speak. Perry stepped closer. There's nothing left for you to claim. He died with nothing. That land isn't yours. Fenton's eyes flicked toward the door, then back to her. You can't prove he didn't assign it over. Garen stepped through the door then, rifle still slung but visible. She doesn't have to, you just said it. Fenton's mouth closed. He didn't speak again. They returned to Willow Creek 2 days later, papers in hand, Fenton's false claim withdrawn under pressure and the name joiner refiled with the county clerk. Back home, the creek had thawed clean. The garden Perry tended had sprouted green beneath the mulch she'd laid. Garin stopped by the fence post, ran his thumb along the smooth top rail he'd built that winter and looked toward the house. She was on the porch, arms crossed, one foot braced against the post. "You told me once you weren't here for the easy parts," she said. He stepped closer. "Still true. You meant it." "I meant every word." It was quiet for a moment. "I want to make this official," she said, voice steady. "I want to be yours, not just in how we live, but in name." He moved slowly but not uncertainly. "I'd give you mine if you want it." "I do." "Then we'll say the words," he said. "Here, with the mountains watching." She nodded, and for the first time in months the line across her brow eased. They stood together on the porch, the sun slipping behind the barn, and Garin reached for her hand. "I've never had much to offer," he said. "But I can promise this: you'll never have to face this world alone again." She squeezed his fingers. "That's all I want, just one place that doesn't break." They married the next Sunday in the clearing behind the cabin with Mrs. Letham and the stableman from town bearing witness. Perry wore a dress she'd sewn from muslin and trimmed in lace she'd bartered for with dried herbs. Garin wore his best shirt and combed his hair for the first time in weeks. They said their vows without flourish, without pretense. Just truth. That night they sat on the porch, bare feet on the step, her head resting against his shoulder. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. He kissed her temple. "You never needed to be, I know, but it's nice not to feel it." In the months that followed, the garden yielded more than they'd hoped. Garin added a second room to the cabin, and Perry began collecting books from travelers who passed through. They built a coop, then a smokehouse, then a life. They never saw the man from the woods again. The debt faded into dust with the rest of the past. What remained was the soil beneath their feet, the sound of the creek, and the soft way she said his name when the mornings came quiet. They didn't chase peace. They made it, and they kept it. Together.